The following program is made possible in part by the Dayton Bar Association.
Well, good evening. This is Jeff Swillinger. I'm your host this evening of You and the Law. This is the November 2021 installment, and I'm very pleased to have as my guest this evening, Catherine Demposey. Catherine is an attorney at Legal Aid of Western Ohio, also known as LAWO, L-A-W-O, the acronym. I am going to change things up so we can get started a little earlier. Usually I spend much too much time giving you all the background information about where the show can be seen and so forth. So let me just go through that really quickly. First, I want to thank the staff of EATV for their good work each and every show. I want to thank the Bar Association for underwriting the program. The show is live streaming. It is also on television. You can go to DATV's website. That's www.datv.org, and you can get the information relative to what stations you can see the show on this evening live. It shows to the west of Dayton, to the north of Dayton, to the east of Dayton, over to Clark County, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and all sorts of different cities in and around Dayton, except in the south. And good people at Miami Valley Cable Council have agreed to air the show on a periodic basis after this evening. So those in the south will have to either live stream the show some other way or will not be able to see it tonight, in case anyone asks you about the availability of the show. Now, with that in mind, I want to get started. Our topic for this evening is domestic violence, a legal response. And as I said, Catherine Demposey is graciously here this evening and is our guest. Catherine, I'm going to ask you to tell our viewers a little bit about you and what you do, and then we'll get into a little bit more of the meat of the show and move forward after that. And again, this is a live call-in show. So folks, you can call in at the number 937-223-5311. The only issue, because we're on Zoom, I will not see or be able to communicate directly with you. I will get through our Zoom chat kind of a summary of your question. I'll do my best then to show it to Kathy, or provide the question summary to Kathy verbally, and we'll try to answer. Just one of the consequences of doing this on Zoom and not live as we've done in the past. So with that in mind, Kathy, again, good evening. Tell us about you.
Hi, yes. My name's Kathy Demposey. I am staff attorney here with Legal Aid of Western Ohio in our Dayton office. I've been practicing law for 34 years, and the last 17 of those have been here with LAWO. My practice is in two areas of the law, primarily in our health and public benefits practice group, where we focus on helping folks who have issues or problems with Medicaid, food assistance, SSI, SSDI, those kind of issues. And then I'm also in our stability and independence for survivors practice group, which deals mostly with family law issues. And as you can tell from the title of the practice group, we focus here at LAWO on serving survivors of domestic violence, stalking, sexual assault, and human trafficking.
You want to repeat that category, those four categories, I believe?
Sure. So our focus in our practice group that deals with family law issues is on serving survivors of domestic violence, stalking, sexual assault, and human trafficking.
Okay, very good. And this is all for our viewers in the civil context as opposed to the criminal context. You want to differentiate just briefly the difference?
Sure, sure. Yes, here at LAWO, we only practice in the civil areas of practice. We don't do criminal defense work. We represent clients in domestic relations court and or juvenile court, but we don't do criminal defense work. Sometimes, occasionally, we are able to assist survivors of domestic violence by assisting them to ensure their rights as crime victims. So we can sometimes, help them talk with prosecutors in domestic violence cases where our clients are the victims. We can help them communicate with the prosecutors, but we're not, we don't do direct representation in court for the parties in criminal cases.
Yeah, there you're serving more as just to provide some guidance to them, to help them navigate the criminal system, I imagine, criminal law system, as opposed to being more directly hands-on in court-related matters in the civil system. Is that fair to say?
Right, right.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a large number of our domestic violence survivor clients who we're representing them in a civil protection order case, and oftentimes there is at the same time going on a criminal case against their abusive partner.
Okay. Now, and all throughout this is woven one theme that I picked up in reading about you, and that is your goal is to help clients get their voices heard, and that resonates loudly to me. And I think it's kind of the dome over all of this work from where I sit.
Exactly. In so many domestic violence situations, the vast majority of cases, domestic violence survivors are, well, let me kind of come at it from a different angle. In most domestic violence situations, oftentimes there's a tendency to think that the abuser has an anger management problem, and that if he could only get his anger under control, that would fix things. Really, in most cases, it's not an issue of anger management. Most abusers, their primary issue is power and control. They're trying to exercise and exert power and control over their partner. And that's why so often you see situations where people who deal with an abusive person in the workplace or out at the store or wherever, they see this perfectly courteous, seemingly affable person, but behind closed doors, oftentimes they're completely different. So oftentimes an abuser will, in the workplace, if the boss yells at them, they're going to be, yes, sir, whatever you say. If they get a speeding ticket, on the way home. They're, yes, officer, I know I was speeding. But then when they get home, that's when they explode, and they're
That's when they feel some power that they didn't have before, and
right.
some
And
sense of control to
yeah,
exercise over their spouse or significant other. Well,
yes. And so then kind of the transition that we try to exercise when we're working with clients who are survivors of domestic violence is to try and help them regain some of that power and control over their own lives. So, you know, again, helping them have their voice heard in court, and also, you know, listening to them and what it is that's important to them in a situation. Because we often hear how domestic violence survivors repeatedly go back to their abusive partner, and there's a whole host of reasons for that, whether it's economic, if they're economically dependent on their partner, or if they you know, if they have children together and they don't want the children to lose their father, or they, you know, they've been in this relationship for a long time, and they love the person and they want to give the person another chance. And so, you know, we see many of our clients who are in the process of trying to leave. And for many domestic violence survivors, it takes numerous times trying to leave before they finally leave for good. And so, you know, our role is to listen to them, and, you know, if they're not ready to leave for good, we try to, you know, talk with them, make sure they understand their, you know, their legal rights and the benefits and risks of you know, continuing on with a civil protection order versus going back home. But ultimately, you know, we leave that decision to them. We just want them to know what their rights are, what the risks are, but we want them to have that power and control, that decision-making power. You know, we try to leave to them.
well, that's a very good segue. I think we've touched on this already in terms of really defining what we mean by domestic violence. And if you could talk about that, I may be asking you to repeat a little bit of what you said, but maybe we can approach it in whatever way you choose, or if you want to talk about a scenario where the police are called out to a home, there's some dispute, and kind of what happens after that that ultimately brings the client to you, and how do they navigate just the system of coming into Legal Aid of Western Ohio, and, you know, particularly in this COVID environment, there's probably some nuances there too.
Sure.
So if that helps you kind of get started here, that'd be great.
Sure. So again, domestic violence is it's a complex topic and a complex set of circumstances. Of course, you know, where the police come in, or most of the time where we come in as attorneys, is kind of usually when there's been some overt physical violence. But domestic violence is really kind of a constellation of factors and actions, and it's you have to look at the relationship of the parties as a whole. It's probably been building up for a long time. Um, we sometimes phrase it as if somebody hauled off and slapped you on your first date, you probably wouldn't date the person again. But there's all kinds of different actions that really create an environment of domestic violence. Um, we talk about it as kind of a pattern of coercive control. So it starts out, the relationship is very loving and sweet, and then the one partner may say to the other, well, I care about you so much. I want to spend all my time with you, and they start taking over that person's time and isolate them from family members and other friends. They say, "Oh, I worry about your safety so much. Make sure you call me the minute you get to work, and and make sure you call me on your lunch hour." And then it escalates, and then maybe the woman moves in with the abusive partner, and maybe it still hasn't gotten to the level of physical violence. And I Let me interject. I do tend to use refer to abusers as males, and victims and survivors more typically as females. And I do that because the vast majority of domestic violence situations, the vast majority, it's been statistically shown, the vast majority are, the abusers are male and the victims or survivors are female. So that's just an acknowledgement of the way it is. But in any event, if you're, if the woman moves, the victim or survivor moves in, then the abuser starts to say, well, let me take care of you financially, you stay home, I'll go to work. And then the woman becomes financially dependent, and then things escalate, and you get often to the point of there being this overt physical violence, and oftentimes that's when the police get called in, and so you have this whole arena of domestic violence that kind of surrounds the narrower legal concept of domestic violence.
So what I'm gathering here is you had a bowl here, you put into that different ingredients sometimes to get to defining what domestic violence might be in a given situation. It may be actual physical abuse, it may be emotional abuse, it may be an outcome of some mental health issues that the parties have. It may be a response to pressure from job situations, loss of revenue, all sorts of things can come to bring this to the fore. And as you said, the police will often be called. And in talking about male on female as being the majority of cases, domestic violence charges can result against children also, can it not? And then you can be working with helping not only the adults, but the children involved in the home. And I don't know if there are others. I vaguely recall from the criminal statutes there was language about household members. I don't know that people always have to be related, but why don't you tell me if I have that right or not?
Right, right. In order for any kind of violence to be considered domestic violence, there has to be a certain relationship between the parties. So they either have to be related by marriage, or it could be abuse by a parent of a child. It could be abuse of a parent by an adult child. It could be brothers and sisters, but there has to be, and it can also be, um, people who have lived together in an intimate relationship. Um, More recently, as far as civil protection orders are concerned, um, parties who've been in a dating relationship but haven't necessarily lived together, they could also get a civil protection order. But domestic violence really hinges on there being this type of relationship between the parties. It can't just be, an
Someone comes,
acquaintance, or
okay. Someone
somebody.
comes over for an evening, there's a party, a fight ensues between somebody who's a guest, but not a member of the family who, excuse me, that could still result in the police being called, someone being charged with assault or some form of assault or battery, that type of thing, correct, without it
Right, right. Yeah, that,
evolving
that
into
would
a
be
domestic
more just a general assault type of situation.
violence. See.
Domestic violence, again, is where you have this relationship, which kind of adds another dimension of complication to the legal situation, and certainly the emotional situation, because this is someone that you are related to or have a relationship with, and that makes things all the more difficult emotionally for the victim.
Now, do you see situations, you hadn't really thought about this at the moment until what you just talked about. Children in the home uh, being abusive of other children in the home. The abuser might be over 18, might not be over 18. The parent doesn't know what to do about it. Um, Something bad can happen. The police may be called. Even if the police are not called, let's say the parent does the child, most importantly, somehow have a remedy there with which you can assist. Do you see those kind of cases?
Right. Yes. So if the if the person who's engaging in the abuse, the abuser, is under the age of 18, of course, as far as any kind of criminal charges, that would go through the juvenile court at first.
Yes.
But there are also civil protection orders that people can obtain. Again, this would be through juvenile court if the abuser, or the term would be a respondent in the protection order case, you can obtain a protection order against a juvenile, and that would be through juvenile court.
Okay. Well, let's talk then. That's again a good segue into talking about remedies. Once you've you've described domestic violence, some of the causes of it, some of the circumstances where people are charged with crimes, but there's an ongoing pattern, and now the victim and maybe other family members are seeking some protection. What are some of the remedies that you and your colleagues are engaging in? And while you're talking about that, we can get back to those 4 categories you mentioned earlier, and you can blend into that and also talk about the issues for survivors in particular communities. And I'll just let you take that as you want to let that unfold.
Sure. That's a lot of issues.
Yeah. Well, you were so kind.
They're all interrelated, and it's kind of a tangled web.
Take your time. Take your time.
So obviously, one remedy that victims of domestic violence can pursue is of course calling law enforcement, getting the police involved, and pursuing criminal charges against the abuser. And there are all kinds of considerations that victims have to weigh when they're getting involved with law enforcement and the criminal justice system. Of course, they obviously, if they're calling 911, their first concern is safety and getting getting the abuser away, stopping whatever is happening in that initial moment. Then when law enforcement actually comes out, the victim then has to consider, do I really want to pursue this? Because oftentimes by the time law enforcement gets out there, maybe they're reconsidering, and they just want law enforcement to calm things down and make sure that they're safe in that moment. And by the time law enforcement gets there, maybe they've started to be concerned about, they love this person, and maybe they don't want them to, have to suffer the consequences of going to jail, or if they are taken off to jail, or if they're charged criminally, somewhere down the road, they may decide that, boy, we have children together. I'm financially dependent on this person. He's gotten back in touch with me, and he says he's really sorry. And so that can create a difficult situation for the victim. Oftentimes they're conflicted about going forward. Fortunately, most prosecutors now have gotten to be very good about consulting with victims, especially since the advent of Marcys Law in Ohio a few years ago.
You want to briefly talk about that?
Sure. Crime victims under what's called Marcys Law, that gave certain constitutional rights to crime victims, such as getting notice of any public hearing in the criminal system. They have the right to consult with the prosecutor. And so more and more, and there are a number of other rights that they have, but it seems to me from what I've seen, most prosecutors um, are becoming very good about consulting with the crime victim, especially in a domestic violence situation. There's less of this. I mean, obviously, the prosecutor represents the state, and they decide whether or not, they ultimately decide whether or not the criminal case goes forward. But we're seeing a lot less of this kind of punitive reaction to survivors who, for one reason or another, don't want the criminal prosecution pursued. They may feel that it's not safe for them to pursue the criminal prosecution. They may feel as if, if he gets convicted, the minute he gets out of jail, he's going to come looking for me, and he's going to be madder than ever. So, or they might have some other safety net in place. So it's good to see that there's less of this punitive approach of, either holding a victim in contempt if they don't show up for court, or even, charging them with falsification or something like that.
These are charges against the victim.
Right. In an effort to try and strong arm the victim into pursuing the criminal charges.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's the criminal type of remedy, and there are many survivors who are they've been through enough that they are ready to absolutely pursue the criminal charges, and they want to make sure that the abuser is held accountable. And so again, most prosecutors now are doing a good job of consulting with the victims, and taking into account their views in the criminal system.
Go ahead.
Then on the other side, you've got the criminal justice system, and then of course you've got the civil justice system, and that's where we are primarily involved. We represent many clients in civil protection order cases, and a civil protection order case. Again, there's a number of considerations for the victim, but a civil protection order case, a civil protection order would give the it's less about punishing the abuser, but primarily about protecting the victim. So in a civil protection order case, the abuser is ordered to stay away from the victim, not have any contact with them, not communicate with them. And then if the abuser were to violate that would be a crime in itself.
Now, let me interrupt you here. I have a question here.
Sure.
And from one of our viewers, and I believe it directly relates in part to what you were just talking about. The question is, what makes women go back to their abusers? Now, I know you've touched on the relationship, the love that might have existed between the abuser and the victim, economic issues, children. But if you want to kind of blend that back into the protection order situation, if that's appropriate or however you want to answer that,
Sure.
if there's
Sure.
more to answering that question.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think I may have touched on this a little bit earlier that um, for many domestic abuse survivors, leaving is a process.
Yes.
They may try to leave for a little while and then go back, and it takes a number of times before they leave for good. And there are there's so many reasons why women go back, and again, some of those we touched on are you know, if they're economically dependent on the abuser, you know, and they don't have a job, they don't have a way to provide for themselves. Oftentimes, the victim kind of feels trapped, and so they'll go back for a while, and maybe it takes them a while to figure out how to leave. You know, maybe they're not ready to leave right then, leave permanently, and they'll go back and and again, so many times, this is a person they love, and the abuser will say, oh, I promise it'll never happen again, and things get better for a while, and the victim really believes that that maybe they can change, and it just takes numerous times for them to decide that they're ready to leave, and that's that's perfectly understandable.
Well, and to that question in your response, we haven't really talked about any mental health component for the victim here, and whether you work with mental health professionals or refer the victims to mental health professionals in the course of your representation to help them kind of deal with questions like what makes them go back, why would they go back, why would they not go back, what are the core issues there that they're dealing with? Because I think I'd like to believe that it's much less of a stigma today when victims want to go back, and people say, well, you get what you deserve if you go back, and people don't stop to really think about what that victim, what that family has gone through and what they're going through and might continue to. And I would think part of that is not only the representation in the courts, but also mental health support for them. Is that accurate?
Sure. So, yeah, there are a number of agencies that provide counseling to domestic violence survivors, and there are actually we find a number of our clients who have already availed themselves of counseling and mental health services, and actually oftentimes one pattern that we've become very aware of is that people with disabilities of any kind, be it physical or mental, they experience domestic violence at a higher rate than folks without those disabilities, and unfortunately, sometimes folks with any kind of impairment unfortunately have bad experiences with law enforcement, and so that that's a whole realm of issues that has to be dealt with as well, because then again, if they've had bad experiences with law enforcement, then they may be less likely to call on law enforcement.
And may try to work it out themselves, as difficult as that might be. Okay.
Right.
Now, I think we could talk more about that, but we've got two more questions, and I'm going to read them out loud. I understand that you were kind to give me an outline, and there's a lot more for us to talk about, but we're not going to worry about that, because
Sure.
if we don't get to it, and I believe we have about another 15 minutes or so, maybe not quite that, and that's when the arm twisting comes in later off the camera, when I try to see if you'll come back. And maybe we can finish some of that in another show. I was just told 15 minutes from me. So here are the questions. Do children really grow up to become like the family they grew up in? Do they grow up to be abusers or victims? I should put question marks at the end of that. Do they grow up to be abusers, or do they grow up to be victims? And the next question is, why aren't women who are abusers talked about more? Now, that's the order in which those questions were asked. You can answer them in whatever order you choose.
I guess the answer to the first question is, I guess yes to both. It's very common for children who have observed domestic violence in their home, and maybe experienced it and been direct victims of that. It's not uncommon for them to, as adults, end up in relationships where they are abused, and sometimes they may end up being abusive to others. That happens with distressing frequency, but hopefully, hopefully people start to attend more to how domestic violence affects the children in the home, and try to address that early on before they get to adulthood, so that hopefully they don't repeat the same cycle that their parents were in.
So I would think that the mental health component here, working hand in hand with what you're doing, becomes so important, particularly with the victims and those who are children, so that this cycle doesn't continue and you address it as early as possible. That some of the physical abuse might, go away, the black and blue marks, the bruises and that, but the deeper emotional side of all this seems to be what, from my perspective, what I've seen at times over the years, what leads people down a dark path, because they've been so broken by this.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
But you want to comment on that, or you want to go to the next question? Why aren't women who are abusers talked about more?
Sure, I'll address that second question. Well, again, statistically speaking, in heterosexual relationships, the vast majority of the abusers are male, and the victims are female. Now, that being said, there are situations where the woman is the abuser, and the male is the victim, and we have those questions regularly. Well, not regularly, but we do have male clients who've been abused by their female partner. And yeah, that does happen.
Now, you told me that, or you provided for me this list of questions I mentioned, and you mentioned there are issues for domestic violence survivors in particular communities, people of color, people with disabilities, members of the LGBTQ plus communities. I know we're kind of winding down here, and I now have another question. I'm tired of being abused. How do I get out of it and start to look for help? So that kind of piggybacks, I think, on the last piece of what you were saying. Let me step back for a moment before you attempt to answer that. With the 10 minutes or so that we have left, and with the understanding that I think we could talk more about this in another show and talk more about some of the remedies that are involved here besides the protection orders, so forth. Why don't you take a moment and prioritize for me what maybe you want to talk about in these last few minutes? Do you want to address that question of how do I get out of it and start to look for help, where I might look for help? Maybe we talked about a list, and I know you put together some information as to how people can find out how to get help. Do you want to focus on that maybe in the time we have left? And I apologize to any of the people asking questions if we haven't had enough time to thoroughly address this, but if Kathy is willing and we can make this happen, maybe we might even come back to this next month. So we'll see.
Yeah. So let me just say a few words about the particular issues that are faced by some particular communities, and then I want to talk about the resources for people who do want to get out of a domestic violence situation, and I think that's probably a good way to approach our remaining minutes.
Okay.
What we've become more and more aware of, and advocates working with domestic violence survivors have become more and more aware of in the last several years, is the how these issues that and extreme difficulties that domestic violence survivors face are amplified and multiplied if the victim is either a person of color, or a person with a disability, or a member of the LGBTQ plus community, or some intersection of two or all three of those. Women of color experience domestic violence at a higher rate than white women in this country. They report a higher level of dissatisfaction in the way they are treated by law enforcement. People with disabilities, again, they may have barriers to reporting. They have additional concerns, possibly because maybe they're dependent on the abuser for their physical care. So there's a whole host of issues, and then members of the LGBTQ plus community. There's still a lot of bias and hate that they experience, and they may fear being outed by their partner. They may fear how they're treated by law enforcement or the judicial system in general. Um, so we're trying to focus at LAWO more attention to the especially difficult path that that folks in those communities experience, and trying to find ways to root out that kind of bias that has led to making an already difficult situation, experiencing domestic violence, that's made it that much harder. So, so having said that, yeah, I do want to talk about resources for people who want to get out of an abusive situation. There are a number of.
Let me interrupt you just for a second.
Sure.
Because we're running 5 minutes remain, and I want to make sure that the people who have called and have questions know that I've received those. And I'm sorry that we're just running out of time, but I'll do my best as I look at you in the camera to see to it that we continue to discuss this topic, this very important topic. And I'm sorry that we're not going to get to all the questions. Just so I can read them, protection orders haven't worked for me. It's more of a statement. Another question is, has COVID affected the ability for people to get help? I know we talked about that earlier before we went on live on the program. And with the COVID, do you want to address the COVID question, or do you want to talk about resources?
I think I probably would like to prioritize talking about resources for folks.
And this is not to diminish anyone's questions and the
Sure.
importance of that. Again, I want to assure you folks that this is a very important subject. I know that, Kathy knows that, and those who are watching tonight, I'm sure know that from a variety of angles. So, or positions, excuse me. So we'll continue this discussion, but go ahead, Kathy, in terms of resources.
Sure. So, yes, so there are a number of agencies around the Miami Valley that provide services for domestic violence survivors, and most, probably most importantly, there are a number of agencies that will do safety planning with a survivor. So if someone is in a situation and they want to get out, they can call these agencies and have someone kind of work through, you know, what a person can do to leave safely, or to keep themselves safe if they're staying. So let me give you the names and phone numbers of some of those.
Go right ahead.
So in the Dayton, Montgomery County area, there are a couple of agencies. Artemis Center provides many services to domestic violence survivors, safety planning, connecting with economic resources, counseling. And Artemis, their number is 937-461-HELP, or 937-461-4357.
Would you spell the word Artemis again?
And that's spelled ARTEMIS.
Okay.
And then we also, in the Dayton, Montgomery County area, we have the YWCA, and their phone number is 937-222-SAFE. That's 937-222-SAFE. 222-7233. And in Preble County, the YWCA provides services there, and the number in Preble County is 937-456-6891. Then in Greene County, we have the Family Violence Prevention Center, and they have two phone numbers, 937-372-4552 or 937-426-2334. And in Clark County, there's Project Woman, and their phone number is 1-800-634-9893.
Now,
And then if you're looking for legal assistance.
Now I wanted to make sure we got your number.
Yes.
Before we leave, because
Right.
I think we're breathing fumes here in the amount of time we have left.
All right.
So, please.
So if you're seeking legal assistance, you can seek our assistance by calling our legal aid line, and that number is 1-888-534-1432, or you can apply for our help online at www.legalaidline.org. That's www.legalaidline.org.
Okay. Now, I haven't been told that to wrap it up, but I think now that I said that, I may get that text. But people, we were close to wrap up time. Let me just say this. When folks call Legal Aid of Western Ohio, tell us what they can expect initially. They don't call and ask for you unless they later become your client. So just to give them a reasonable expectation, go ahead.
Sure. When they call our legal aid line, they will most likely they'll be asked to give some basic information, their name, a phone number that they can be called back at, and a kind of a summary of what their legal problem is. Typically, they will be called back within 2 business days. Although if they're in an urgent situation with domestic violence, they try to make that faster. But they will be called back, and our legal aid line will need to take some basic information, and then if they have a civil protection order hearing coming up, then they will probably be referred to an attorney like myself to see if we can provide actual representation.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sorry to have rushed you at the end. This is a good thing when we have calls, and try to help our callers. To the folks who've tuned in this evening, and to those who may see the program later on, thank you very much for viewing the show. Thank you very much to the staff at WDA-TV, and of course, thank you to Catherine Dempsey, our attorney and guest for the evening. And I hope we can maybe have you back, and we can talk about certain aspects of this subject that we haven't been able to address fully. And it looks like this will be a good opportunity for others to call in and ask questions. So with that in mind, I thank you. This program is underwritten by the Dayton Bar Association and brought to you through the employees and volunteers at DATV. Just a wonderful group of people at DATV, and I thank you all. And our next show will be the first Monday of December, and I will say good night.
Thank you.